And we are live. Yay! Well, folks, it has been a while. I still am Laura May Lindo. It is true. That is me. Your happy member of Provincial Parliament for Kitchener Centre. And it has been a little bit of time since I have been able to do this wee podcast, primarily because I had an unexpected move of my office. And so I have been unpacking boxes and trying to organize. You are now staring at like this one little section. I know everybody out there knows this is what we do. We make one little section appear as though we've got it together, and everything else on the periphery is the chaos. But that's not why you're here. You are here, my friends, to participate in another fine podcast. I think this is our 10th episode of People in My Hood, a philosophical podcast. And as per usual, we want to start right. And what does that mean? That means acknowledging where I am hosting this from. So I am in my fancy office in Kitchener Centre. This land has been held down, cared for, loved, and stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people. I have been taught, as you have heard in the past, if you follow me or see me chatting about stuff and doing my land acknowledgements, that acknowledging the land you're on is the easy part. You can Google that. There are apps for that, so that as you wander in the universe, you can see who has been holding down, stewarding, and protecting the land, the water, the air around you. But part of the reason why there's been a push for land acknowledgements is to do something a little bit deeper, and that is making a concrete connection between the land that you're on, where you are hosting your conversation or engaging in a conversation, which is often stolen land if you dig into that history, and the topic of the conversation that you're about to have. And for me today, I am completely honored and blessed and so super lucky to have Sara Escobar with me to talk about a couple different things, issues that sort of intertwine. There's a lot of information in the news about the opioid crisis that we're having here in Waterloo Region, across the province, and even further beyond there. And there are a lot of conversations about folks that are unsheltered, folks that are struggling to maintain their homes, the lack of resources that they have to support themselves, and ensure that they can move from their sort of navigation in any kind of consumption and towards a better life where they can thrive and be grounded, etc. And what we also know, and is often not discussed as explicitly, is that many of the people that are struggling in these ways, that are not able to access proper supports, are folks that have been vulnerable because of the realities of colonization. And nobody really wants to go that deep into it. But the reality is, when you colonize land and take land and from people, when you deny their existence and their humanity, as we have seen far too many times with the history of Indigenous communities on this land, there is a depth of loss that communities feel that have them sometimes turn to different ways to try and feel, even for a moment, a semblance of joy and personhood and humanity and community, because a lot of people engage in this way in community to try and build themselves back up when these systems around are fighting to take them down and tear them down. And so for that reason, there are often, when we look at the populations that are struggling to maintain their homes, when we look at populations that are fighting to have culturally responsive mental health supports, when we look at populations that are trying to get help to navigate a plethora of issues, including addictions, you will see that there are many Indigenous communities, many Black communities, many Brown communities, many of the most vulnerable people are there. We would be remiss if we argued that there was something wrong with them, when the reality is there is something wrong with the system around us that allows people to have to navigate those kinds of hardships on their own. And so for me, that's my connection. That is the reason why it was important to start with the land acknowledgement in this conversation. And that is important for me as to why I want to have that reality as the backdrop, that colonization was a system that was supported, sanctioned, legalized, and justified. And there are certain people for whom that system was not working, and nobody even could take them a moment to see their humanity. And that's the reason why I asked Sara to come and chat with me. Sara is a friend of mine in my hood in Kitchener Center, who I have met in a variety of different spaces doing a variety of different things. But one of the chance meetings that we had was actually in Victoria Park. And I remember being introduced to you there. And I remember hearing about the kind of outreach work that you do. And I remember leaving that conversation knowing that you were doing this in a way that was connecting the bigger systemic issues around us to the on the ground work that you were doing. And it's for that reason that you were able to hold so many people in community with love, care, and compassion. And so thank you, first off, for everything that you do. And thank you for joining me on this 10th episode of People in My Hood, a philosophical podcast. So what I always do, folks, it's always the same. And if you're watching this on the live stream, by all means, put comments in there. Thank you for the very kind words. But put comments in, questions. It's not that we'll always be able to get to them all, but these podcasts stay in the virtual space, and we still engage with them, and we can bring more people in to have these conversations. So here's what I do. I always ask people the same three questions. And the first one is to give you a chance to talk to us and to everybody who's watching in the world about the gap in the system that you are operating in. So you can go anywhere that you want with that, but talk to me about what that gap is.
So thank you for inviting. And I'm gonna say us. I'm gonna use us because I really never feel like I'm representing just myself. I have. I also pause a lot. So how I speak and the language I choose is very important to the work that we do, but it also extends to our everyday life. And so I am thoughtful and very particular in how I say things and the words that I would choose to use. So I've learned to not be ashamed. Somewhere along the lines, our community taught us, our society taught us to be ashamed of stopping and pausing and thinking. Um, Not ashamed of doing that anymore.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I'm gonna pause and I'm gonna think. And the questions that you gave, actually, we were chatting. So I work at one of the local shelters as well, and so we were chatting with some of the folks that I work with there last night, and I was asking them how they would answer these questions. And the
Oh,
beautiful piece about the questions, let me tell you, is that they went everywhere. They went everywhere, and I think that one of the things that really interested me in the podcast was that you put the word philosophical in there. So if folks are interested in stats, there's lots of websites that have numbers and statistics. I want to get down to the nitty gritty. I want to be able to just go as wherever you want to go. Well, let's just go, because as far as systems and navigating those systems, they're gigantic. They're huge. Like you said at the very beginning, it is embedded in colonialism, in right from our first steps were taken on this land, and uh, and we really have to question what was the purpose of the systems that we still continue to function in today. Realistically, times were different, people were different, society, people were needing to do different things in society to be able to survive at those times.
yeah.
We need to have a look at those again. Um, One of my questions about systems is I don't know what attachment we have to these systems that we get defensive when it comes to
Yep.
asking questions about them, about their origins, about the function, about the cost of the systems. And that's one of the first questions I'm trying to understand right now is what is the attachment that we have to the systems that we had zero input into writing? We weren't even around, and so for me that's really when it comes to the gaps. That's actually where I need to start, because I need to understand what the attachment is to these systems and the gaps, because I think that that will lead us to understand why the gaps still exist. We need
Yeah.
to understand how the people are seeing it and how is it different than what we are seeing. Um, for us working on the ground, realistically, is that what's coming down from the higher ups, from the statistics, from reports, seem very different than our experience on the ground.
Yeah.
And that we don't know what to do with. That discrepancy is really hard to live with in mind and in heart, because you're asked to do things in the work that you're not allowed to do, or that people will frown upon, or that you're being too loving and too caring. Not sure exactly what that means yet. Too
Yeah.
loving and too caring. uh, yeah, so these system questions for me are so much bigger, because we need to go back. We need to figure out and understand them. um, I don't have an answer to that yet. I don't know if you jump in, because
Can you tell me what some of the folks were saying when you were asking them that first question? Like, where did they go with that?
well, so this is the staff, right, that we're working, that I work with.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and so they were talking again, this the larger system, they went big. So how are we supposed to do our work when we're not feeling supported? And I'm really going to be careful. It's not that people aren't wanting to support. Is I think that we are in a time and space, and I've said this before, where we've not been here before. We've not
yeah,
experienced everything that we're experiencing right now as a community. Uh, we've not done this before, and
yeah,
so the supports that were in place before all this began, they might have been sufficient then. We need more now. We need different. We need brave. We need creative.
yeah,
Um, so
yeah.
exploring things like, so counseling groups, one-on-one things, self-care. Those are good things. Those are good tools. Not criticizing that. For certain folks, uh, for certain work environments, and depending on the situation you're in. But the work that the work that's especially at the street level, if we're working with folks that are experiencing homelessness, and people that are dying from the poison drug supply, then we need more. And we're also connecting with people in such a different way. We're asking the workers to go out and build true relationships, because we understand that in those relationships is where the trust comes in, and that's where the work gets done.
That's right.
We don't have relationships with each other. Why would I trust you? I have no reason to trust you. And how
Yeah,
am I going to allow you to help me go through steps of life? I have to find a home, I have to feed myself. It's those are things that are super important, and I need to create safety with that.
yeah.
So I tend to ramble. I should say that too.
No, that's not a ramble, but for me, it goes right back to where you started about the systems and why we trust them unconditionally when we weren't there to develop them. We don't know the why behind how the systems were created, and yet we just go on with our bad selves thinking that it has to be that way. And one example for me that sort of has popped up in and out throughout the pandemic, for instance, is um, having the health card in order to access health services. So I have to have this particular card. It can't be another card. It has to be that card with that number and documentation for me to access health services, which pre pandemic, cool, I guess. Like that's what we decided. There was a whole group of people that were like, this isn't working for us, migrant workers, folks who were unsheltered before
Mhm.
pandemic that didn't have space to hold these cards because it's not just one, but just for them, that system wasn't working. But for the rest of the folks who had all sorts of things in place according to the system already, that made sense
Mhm.
because that was accountability and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
When the pandemic hit, we had to rethink that system because
Yes.
everybody should have had access to the healthcare that they needed because we were all going down if we weren't making sure that the most vulnerable were okay,
That's right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that they tell us about the systems is that there isn't enough money to fund all of the systems, right? So we prioritize certain systems. Um, I mean, lots can be said about that, and then not others. And so when it comes down to education, social services, arts, music, there's usually not enough. We need to split this pot, which is the smaller pot. This bigger pot is much bigger. We
Yeah,
can't touch this one. So the ones with this bigger pot tell us that there isn't enough money for us, and we buy that. We believe that. I don't know why we're believing that. There is
Mm-hmm.
enough money. They just have to share that 1%. And I think the more we start questioning these systems in the way that it is, the current narrative,
Yeah.
the better we'll all be. And I think we need to really understand what's happening. Where
We
is the
need
money? Why is
definitely,
it
definitely.
shared? Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. And as this is a philosophical podcast, folks, I will go into my philosophical roots. Antonio Gramsci talks about, in the prison notebooks, he talks about the fact that we consent to our own oppression. I used to teach philosophy to high school kids, so I used to give them an example. You're driving down the street, and I may have talked about this actually on this podcast, who knows, but you're driving down the street, the lights, you see the lights from a police car behind you, and you hear the siren. What do? Right? Well, you pull over. And everybody's like, you just pull over. Yet for me, as a Black person, doing that could risk my life. As somebody who's undocumented, doing that could mean I'm jeopardizing my safety. And
Mhm.
but we take for granted that that's what you must do, and there's a whole bunch of rationales as to why. And so the real question from a philosophical space is to make sure that we're okay with the why today. It may have been okay before, based on what, even as you were saying, Sarah, like context change, things shift. But
Mhm.
if now it means that I put my life in danger to do X, Y, and or Z, then why is it that the system itself can't change? Why are we trying to convince me to keep doing the same thing that keeps putting me into danger?
Mhm.
And so that that idea of thinking about the systems to me is something I grapple with all the time, which actually, oddly enough, leads me to the second question. Because I always ask everybody, what does leadership then look like in this place that you're doing your, like, whatever it is that we're talking about? So in this case, when it comes to challenging these systems and thinking about them and thinking about the impact on some of the most vulnerable community members, like thinking about the impact of some of these systems and these normalized ways of being on folks who are unsheltered, on folks that are navigating addiction. What does leadership then look like in that space for you?
I'm gonna use the word brave. Um, it looks like something brave, and I'm using brave to describe things like trust. Trust in. So if you're the leader of a group, of an agency, um, if I think that I believe and I've seen that if you're a leader that trusts and values the knowledge and the skills that your staff has, and you support the decisions that they are making, you encourage them to make decisions based on what they are experiencing in the work. I think and I describe all of that as brave.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's brave because it means taking uncharted paths. It means being creative. It means doing things that we haven't done before, we haven't tried before, and so we don't know the outcomes of that. And that can be scary.
Yeah.
Um, I think good leaders in this kind of work listen to their staff and their workers, and they do that because they know that good workers and good staff listen to the folks that we're supporting, and
Yeah.
so that chain doesn't get lost. Advocating is probably one of the biggest pieces of the work, and so being able to support your staff and your frontline workers to do that in whatever way they feel fit and they need is really really important.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that and working that way, I mean, the trust builds communication, right? Where you are able to come in. We're human, as everybody is human, and
Yeah.
so if you're able to come into work and say, I can't be here today. My heart is too heavy. My mind is busy, and have that supervisor understand it, connect with you, and and then support you in whatever it is that you need. That's brave.
Yeah.
That's brave because we're taking care of that human, um, and and it's brave because we're going the opposite way of structure of boxes. if we're human, humans don't function very well in boxes. We're all different, and so we're gonna grow and shift and change. An amoeba, a cell, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it grows, it shifts, it warps, but it stays intact. You're still a cell, but it moves and it grows and it shrinks and it changes shapes. And that's how I see our communities. That's how I see our humanity. That we need to be able to create safe spaces where workers can explore, can create, can love in safe ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and feel safe doing all those things and feel safe asking questions. You need to be able
Mm-hmm.
to create safe spaces where people can ask questions because and questions grow out of curiosity, not out of criticism.
Yeah.
When you allow somebody to ask questions out of curiosity, that conversation can go a million one ways. If you allow that to happen, oh man, those organic conversations are amazing. And I would love for you to be a part of one of those conversations. If you get a table of outreach workers or frontline workers and you get them to throw a topic and you get them warmed up and you get them talking, we are going to go 101 different directions
Mm-hmm.
because we see connections everywhere.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
if you're someone experiencing homelessness, um, you didn't just get there, right? And you start going up that chain of, you go upstream, right? Of concerns, you're going to probably end up, there's going to be pain. You're going to find pain somewhere. And that's that. And so, and if that pain exists, as frontline workers, we're seeing that pain firsthand. Where hopefully we're being able to sit with that human in a moment of pain and just accompany. We're not there to fix, cure, or solve. You are fine as you are. I just want to be able to sit with you in that pain. And so we need to be able to support workers who are doing that. We are
Yeah.
sitting in people with people in real time and in real pain. And so we need to be able to support those workers that are doing that. And it's not that our folks are damaging us. Um, there's a great resource, Vicki Reynolds out west in BC. She talks about spiritual pain. And the spiritual pain is about not being able to see the humanity, and you have your values, you have your ethics. And the work that you're asked to do is not aligning with those values and ethics. And so every time you go to do something, you sacrifice a value. You go do something else you're not allowed to do, so you sacrifice an ethics. And
Yeah.
so the spiritual pain kicks in. And it's not vicarious trauma because there's nothing wrong with our people and they're not hurting us and they're not damaging us and they're not dirtying me.
Mm-hmm.
They're not hurting me. They're not damaging me. My pain and my hurt is from seeing them hurt in a system that, in its actions, sends a message that they don't belong, that
Yeah.
the system doesn't care, right? So being able to take care of those frontline workers that are seeing that in real time and in real life with people that they love,
Yep. Yep.
that leadership is what we need.
And you know what? Sorry, now I'm going to go into a little bit of a rant as well because um, I feel sometimes that our systems are created to have an experience and move on, have an experience and move on, and there's never space in it to feel what has happened. And I've been sort of reflecting on the path that the pandemic has taken for us, and especially as we've been sort of trying to hold each other in different ways throughout the pandemic, and having to navigate different things throughout the pandemic. A lot of us in positions of leadership have had to take a breath and feel things and had to acknowledge that our staff are feeling things as they're navigating the work that they're doing, which used to be a lot easier because you would just take a phone call, you would hang up. You would take a phone call, you would hang up. You didn't have to pay attention to the depths of what people were navigating on the other side of that phone or across the desk from you, right? And then all of a sudden, we were all thrown into these spaces where we were forced to stop and feel. And from a spiritual space, um, some of that could potentially be um, part of what we are meant to learn with with this experience in 2022 of having a pandemic for the last couple years.
Mhm.
That, you know what I mean? Sometimes the universe provides you with these things
Yep.
that you feel are insurmountable, etc. But you're supposed to be there in that space for a bit to try and figure out how to do it differently and do it better, right?
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
But I think I'm with you. That approach to leadership where you allow yourself and the people that you are working with to to um, navigate their own experiences and their own feelings and emotions about what they have been doing in a way that is respectful to that and believes them
Yeah.
is something that translates into the work that they're actually doing on the ground with people.
Yeah. Well, and it's a much realistic way of being because you can't again, we're dealing with people, and so people are going to be different all the time, and things are going to be flexing. So you need to be able to grow and yeah, and allow your staff to be creative.
Oh, I love this. So then we're going to imagine, this is my final question.
Hmm.
Imagine you wake up, all of the problems within this sector have been solved within this space where your role is to help folks that are unsheltered, your role is to help folks that are navigating addictions, your role is to hold the people doing that work on the ground with care and love and compassion. Everything is fixed, everything is awesome. What does that actually look like in the world?
Oh man.
It's a tough one. As you're thinking about it, I'm going to explain my why behind that
Hmm.
question. um, I believe strongly in speaking what we want into being. And I feel sometimes, because I've my whole career has been with difficult topics and difficult issues and things folks don't want to talk about, we have a lot of space for criticism about things that are not working, and we dedicate less time to actually articulating what it would look like if it did work. And so I ask everybody this one because it's easier to do that front end, like all the problems.
Hmm.
But let's create these spaces where it does work. What does it look like? What would that look like?
Hmm. So community, right? Community is a huge thing. So for me, the, what it, and I giggle because I remember saying to the team last night when we were talking that I stopped apologizing on how I described the work a long time ago, um, because we found ourselves describing the work with love and care and relationships, but we had to apologize first because people weren't going to understand. So we had to just say, "I'm really sorry, but we're going to use it, and it's going to sound mushy and it's going to sound like whatever, but this is what it is." Uh, and so I've had to just stop doing that. So I'm gonna not apologize for the gushy image I'm gonna paint you.
I love it. Bring it.
Uh, for me, because we're talking about community and connection, um, I think one of the biggest challenges has been in the one size fits all solutions. We're trying in the name of cost, in the name of affordability for the system. We are trying to create gigantic um, one size fits all solutions, and they have shown not to really work, be successful at what we're trying to do. And so my brain automatically goes to the opposite then, the opposite end, which means small, intentional communities. So instead of having, you have a large city like Toronto and you have 20 different or you have right now they have what, a handful of like gigantic shelters. You have 60, 100, 200 people in each shelter. My image is the opposite of that. So we create a small city like Kitchener, Waterloo. We have different neighborhoods, and you have small shelters that really are not just shelters. Then, right? We're not just holding people. People are needing to live there
Yeah.
and work on things or be safe. And so instead of having one gigantic one, we have five smaller, different ones that are pocketed in different areas of the community. That creates all kinds of, just putting that
Love
in
that.
different space. We're creating different environments for different people. People have choices. I'm not sure why, if you're poor, if you're homeless, if you're struggling, if you are in pain of some sort, you don't get a choice. You get what we give you. And
Hmm.
so creating choice for people, I think for me is huge. Um, Being able to be in smaller shelter in smaller buildings in different communities allows those communities to connect with that space as well. Each community can absorb it differently, right? If you think about, well, smaller communities, small towns, if somebody's struggling, everybody pitches in.
Yeah.
Same idea, right? If you know, and we know, we hear stories in the downtown, of the everybody that works in that building. There's that guy that always panhandled outside or sat outside on the bench and drank. Everybody knew him. Nobody was scared of him. Everybody chatted. Everybody checked in. People would bring him stuff. People gave money. Why?
Hmm.
Because he's part of your community. Because you know him. So he's not scary. So if we can actually create spaces where that can naturally develop, that I think that's where we're gonna be able to grow safer communities, because that will allow, so that single mom that's struggling and can't pay daycare, right? Or that youth that is not finding the love and support of the parents, but maybe the neighbor down the street connects better with this kid, right?
Yeah.
So this youth didn't go without guidance or without somebody that this youth can talk to. They found somebody in the community.
Hmm.
I think in these ways we can support each other in loving, caring, important ways. That as humans, connection is so valuable. And so that's and so because you have the shelters, then you'll have a smaller food bank, then you'll have those services in smaller communities, so that community is encouraged to connect with each other. So that's sort of my image, which is people are just walking around saying hi and you know each other's names, and which creates
I love
safety,
it.
right? You know your neighbor. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Intentional communities and that are grounded in this notion of relationship building and being there for each other. I love that because I also think that it's only in communities like that that you even feel that it's okay to ask for help
That's
and
right.
ask for the kind of help that you need, right? Like that is brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Um, I just want to end off with this because I what I like is asking that as the last question so that we end in a place where we're imagining something different. And there are a lot of people that have been sort of in the chats on different platforms. I can't actually get to them all at the same time all the time, but um, we'll go back in and people are still going to engage with this. But the part that I'm loving the most is that people are actually putting into chats, into these video thingies, what they imagine, what that could look like, what it is that we need. So let's keep building on that. Like, let's all take it seriously. Imagine that. Imagine if it was about building a community where we were in relationship with folks in real ways, where we did care,
Hmm.
where we did pitch in to try and make these changes. Imagine what that could be and how different it could be. And then let's just use our little positions of influence and such and start to build that because there's no reason why we can't.
Yep.
I know sometimes they give like a cost analysis. They'll be like, and if you do these things, then it wouldn't be as much on the economy, right?
Hmm.
But and yeah, I'm sure that that is very true because as I was thinking through some of those, somebody coming in smaller food banks and smaller this and da 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 da, we know that that would be true. But I think the most important piece is that we would actually live in a way that we cared for each other. Like,
Hmm.
can we not? Can we not do that?
Yep.
And we
Yep.
would build policies that are literally based on that. And if somebody
Yep.
said this policy hurt me, you would actually take it back and do what you need to do to try and finesse the idea that you had in developing that policy and recreate it into something that held people with love, care, and compassion. And so, thank you, Sarah. If you were here in person,
Yes.
I'm giving you a virtual
We
hug.
should do it in person though next time.
One day we're getting there. We're
Yeah.
getting there. So listen, folks, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining us for another episode. Um, oh wait, somebody just put something in and I feel like I should read it. Hold on. Listen, Christine is taught, and the answer is yes. So Christine is out there in the universe watching this as well and asking about folks that are vulnerable, folks with lower incomes, etc. And this is, I think, the biggest shift. At the end of the day, I think I've said this before, so this shouldn't be a shock. But at the end of the day, where every decision is based on money, economy, and capitalism, everybody gets lost in that system. Like your humanity gets lost in that system. And I think what we need to do is have a shift in the way that we think about these systems so that people matter first. And then we start to build these supports around them. There's things that people have been fighting for. Like if you look at the work of Leah Gazan for a basic income, the work that she's been doing to try and push that on the federal side of life, um, like those kinds of things would help us to try and make sure that everybody had what they need. And in a world where costs are going like skyrocketing, we have to think differently about the systems that we have. We have to think differently about our relationship to work. We have to think differently about our relationship to each other. And I think if we have leaders in positions of influence that do care about folks, then those policy changes will happen. And so let us take that and reflect on it until we get back together for episode 11 of People in My Hood, a philosophical podcast. So I'm putting lots of love into the universe. I'm saying a big thank you again to you, Sarah. Thank you to everybody who's in the chat and putting things in. Please keep the conversations going because this is all about community. That's the point. That is the goal. So let's talk to each other and figure out how we can do better. Bye, folks.